Why were there so many revolts against William? Well, there were 5 big rebellions against William. The first was in 1067, when there was a rebellion in the Welsh borders, when an Anglo-Saxon thane called Edric the Wild was joined by 2 Welsh princes and attacked Herefordshire. Then, in 1068, 2 brothers, Edwin and Morcar, gathered allies against William, including the Welsh princes and Edgar Atheling, but their plan came to nothing. In 1069, rebels from Northumbria joined forces with Edgar the Atheling, Malcolm III of Scotland and King Sweyn of Denmark, and launched 2 northern revolts. In the first, the rebels slaughtered the Norman army in Durham, burnt the Norman Earl Robert Cummin to death, and laid siege to Norman Castle in York. In the second rebellion, 2 Norman garrisons were slaughtered. In revenge, William committed the harrying of the north. Then, in 1070–71, Hereward the Wake joined up with King Sweyn and Morcar to launch a revolt in Ely and the fens of East Anglia. Then in 1075, an Anglo-Saxon earl called Waltheof of Northumbria and 2 Norman earls, Roger of Hereford and Ralph of Norfolk, rebelled. So this is the last rebellion, and it's the only one to include Normans. They formed armies when William was away in Normandy. So let's look at how you would answer the question, why did people revolt against William from 1067 to 1075? The first main reason why people revolted was William's use of land. William seized Anglo-Saxon land and gave it to loyal Normans. For example, he removed land around the Welsh borders from Anglo-Saxons and gave this land to Normans in 3 Marcher earldoms. He also reduced the size of Edwin's earldom, which had been in Mercia, and Morcar's earldom in Northumbria. So people revolted because they hoped to gain a leader who would return their land to them. Also, William built castles. These castles were often built on top of Anglo-Saxon houses, causing much resentment amongst the Anglo-Saxons. For example, 166 houses were destroyed in the building of Lincoln Castle. This caused people to revolt because they were angry. Also, William changed the rules of inheritance. Usually, sons could expect to inherit their father's land. But under William, this was not automatic. This is why the 2 Norman earls, Roger of Hereford and Ralph of Norfolk, revolted in 1075, because they didn't think it was fair. They didn't inherit all of their father's land when their fathers died. Another major reason for the revolts were William's decisions. William often visited Normandy whilst he was the King of England. This led to a lot of problems. When he was away, he left regents in control, such as Odo of Bayeux and William Fitz-Osbern. These regents often couldn't be trusted, and did things unlawfully like seizing land and allowing soldiers to rape Anglo-Saxon women without punishment. On one visit to Normandy, William took the brothers Edwin and Morcar with him as hostages. They felt humiliated, and this led them to seek revenge later on and rebel. So William's trips to Normandy caused revolts. Also, William had promised Edwin that he could marry his daughter, but then went back on his word. This caused Edwin to feel betrayed, so he rebelled. Also, William charged more geld tax than Edward the Confessor had. This led people to rebel because they thought this tax was unfairly high, especially as they had less land to gather the tax from. Finally, William and the Norman soldiers used a great deal of violence. So here you have a picture of Harry Potter, because one example of the violence William used was the harrying of the North in revenge for the two northern revolts. The harrying of the North led 100,000 people to die as William's men destroyed livestock and land, putting salt in the soil, which meant people turned to cannibalism because they were so hungry. Another example of the violence of the Normans was the treatment of Hereward the Wake's family. Hereward the Wake's brother had his head cut off and stuck on a fence outside of Hereward's home, and Hereward's mum was raped. The harrying of the North and the treatment of Hereward's family in particular can be seen to have contributed to the rebellion in Ely, as people were so angered by the violence William and the Normans had shown towards them. The final major reason why people revolted against William was the role of figureheads or important people. For example, they were the Earls Edwin and Morcar. Rather than killing all Anglo-Saxon earls, William showed mercy towards them initially. He didn't later on in the harrying of the North, but initially he did. This gave them the opportunity to carry on and launch revolts. Edwin and Morcar were very popular earls, and when they decided to revolt, others joined them. If William had killed them straight away, this wouldn't have happened. So in this sense, by not being harsher sooner, William had allowed revolts to happen. Also, people gathered around Edgar Atheling. Edgar Atheling was a blood relative, the nephew of Edward the Confessor, and people thought that he should have been the next king. Therefore, people gathered around him and joined in the revolts because he was part of them. You also had King Sweyn of Denmark. King Sweyn was a brutal warrior, and by joining the revolts, he made it seem like the revolts could be successful, and others joined in too, especially when he committed his fleet in support of the revolts. King Sweyn was involved in the 1069 and 1070 revolt. Finally, you have the role of our legend, Hereward the Wake. People gathered around Hereward and joined in the Ely revolt because they believed Hereward could achieve victory. Hereward had geographical understanding of the marshes of Ely, whilst William did not. And he was also seen as very brave and had a status almost as a legend. Therefore, people supported Hereward in the Ely revolt. So here are the main reasons why people revolted against William. If you get this question in the exam, be very careful to look at the dates. If the dates, for example, went up only to 1071, you wouldn't be able to include information relevant to the final 1075 revolt of the Norman Earls. So you wouldn't, for example, mention the rules about the inheritance of land, because they are reasons relevant just to the final revolt. You could, though, mention all of the other things. But if the question said the reasons for the revolt from 1070 to 1075, then that would cut out the first two rebellions, the rebellion of Edwin and Morcar and the rebellion in the north. So therefore, you wouldn't mention that Edwin and Morcar were taking hostages because it's not relevant to the question. You wouldn't mention that they felt let down because Edwin had been promised marriage to William's daughter, because that's not relevant to the question. And you wouldn't really mention this here either, because it's not relevant. But you could still mention all of the other pieces of information. This is a lovely question to come up because there's loads of opportunities to talk about specifics. But the big reasons for the revolt are very broad. William's use of land, William's decisions, and figureheads.